I felt very positive about what Apple was going to do with Apple Intelligence after they announced it last year, specifically because they named it Apple Intelligence. In my mind, it felt like if they're naming it with the company name and putting the stamp of their name on this, then they must be incredibly confident about what they're going to be able to do. So I was so excited about, like, you know, because we had Galaxy AI from Samsung, which was really just them kind of mixing a little bit of their own stuff with Google. And then obviously Google and what they're doing, which is very impressive. But I use an iPhone on a daily basis. So I was excited to not rely on third-party apps and just have AI built in. And it's been like the biggest broken promise. You know, people always on Twitter or social media, they'll point back to AirPower as another, but that doesn't feel like a broken promise to me. AirPower, it's a charger. It's not like I can't charge my phone in so many other ways. John, how you been?
Been good, man. It's been a minute. I feel rested. We got some news.
I'm glad. We got a lot of news. You have a lot of news for us this week, but
there's a lot.
And perhaps even bigger news is our guest.
Our guest.
Smaller news, actually. Smaller news.
Who looks surprisingly well rested for having a 3-month-old at home.
Yes. This man, as he told us, he's half the man he used to. Wait, he didn't say that. Double the debt. Never mind. You know what? Let's just introduce it. It's Quinn Nelson, everybody. How are you doing?
The one.
Hey guys,
only.
Daddy's here. Yeah, thank you for saying that I look well rested. I feel very much not that, but as long as it appears as though I am, I'm succeeding.
So Quinn and I have known each other for years, and I've kind of known him personally. And we say this every time Quinn's on the show. He's different online than he is in person. So in preparation for this, I asked every major AI. I said, we're having Quinn Nelson on the podcast.
Oh.
I said, can you go through his Twitter X feed, find the most controversial things that he said on social media?
No.
So we can talk about him. And it was actually my first time ever typing anything into Grok, so that was a fun experience. But you want to know what AI thinks your most controversial tweets are over the past
What do we
years?
got? Bring it. I don't know.
I mean, I was like, because like you're in there, you're not afraid to give some opinions, right? Sometimes they don't always hold up. Sometimes they do.
They typically do.
It said your number one most controversial tweet was your critique of Google's Team Pixel program when they had their, I don't know what you want to call that, a bit of a snafu. I can even read you the tweet that it was referencing. Here are my thoughts on Team Pixel's controversy, and a few people participated, and there was a video that went along with that. So that was number one. Number two.
That ain't controversial. That's just facts. All right, next.
Number two was your departure.
Say, I felt like that was a pretty accurate
It says,
take.
in a move reflecting his stance on platform policies, Nelson announced a transition from Twitter to Mastodon, signaling his disapproval of certain changes on the former's platform. How is that going?
That one might have been a little more controversial. My thought at the time was, Twitter's falling apart. Why don't we leave, go somewhere else, somewhere with less people? Because I don't, frankly, I shouldn't be spending as much time on Twitter as I am. And I left for like, what was it, 4 months? It was really nice. I wasn't on Twitter. I was just chilling. I was happy. Didn't read the news. It was great. But you know what to say? The garbage pulls you back into the dumps. So, yeah.
But AI thinks about you to show, it says, Nelson has a willingness to voice his opinions openly, contributing to his reputation as a forthright commentator in the tech world. I was like, so when the robots have a positive opinion of you, Quinn, I think you're doing something right.
Good job.
Thank you, Grok. Love you, pal.
All right, that was my.
Incredible.
I thought there was going to be way more hot takes, and then I'm like, I can remember some things Quinn said, but then
I think it's missing some, but I'm glad it has the milk toast ones. That's good.
Man, well, speaking of smartphones. John, you picked up a couple of those dummies that came through that have been sweeping the web the past couple of days.
Yeah, we got the dum-dums in, which I should say have been very accurate for the past going on 5 years in dimensions, in design, have been wildly inaccurate in terms of like color and the color palettes.
Materials.
Yeah. But incredibly accurate for designs. Yesterday, we got in, 17 Air, I guess, whatever you want to call that new one. 17, and then the two Pros. So holding a phone that is, it's memory. I'm trying to remember the dimensions of this thing, but I think we're talking, it's like 5 millimeters thin. Memory serves, is insane to hold and feel for a modern phone. 5.5 millimeters. The urge to bend this thing is so incredibly visceral and strong. And ours wasn't made of the actual material it's going to ship with, but it did ship actually bent. Like there was like you could put on a table and you could see light from it. It also looks strange to have that single camera protruding from a side. It looks like a nipple sticking out. And then the big visor on the back. The design is weird, and I'm nervous about battery life. But I love to hear thoughts now that BAVs are actually starting to make their way out to the wild and sort of see something tangible instead of just CAD designs for these things.
Well, you held it. Aside from wanting to bend it and destroy it.
It fit awesomely in the pocket. 6.6 inches is, I think, probably a perfect phone screen size for most people. I love the specs on it. I love that it's going to have 12 gigabytes of RAM, A19 chip. I think all that is awesome. I'm nervous about a 48 megapixel camera. They're taking clearly a pixel approach. They can handle a lot sort of on device or in cloud for processing. Google's done that well. I don't trust Apple for a lot of those things anymore. That trust has been broken. I do not trust Apple for battery life. So whether they use new battery technology inside of it or not, like you're still dealing with a phone casing that its max without the thickness of the materials is 5.5 millimeters.
Oh, it sounds like you're worried. Well, okay, so you held all of them, and
yes.
We're obviously very familiar with the non-Pro and Pro devices.
Correct.
I assume you carry a Pro or Pro Max.
I've always been a Max guy. I decided to go Pro this year. It was a horrible mistake. I couldn't get through a full day of battery. I couldn't get through a full day of battery life. I've embraced who I am as a person, and just I'm always going to be the Max guy from here on out.
Okay, so that's what I was going to ask you. So basically, you like what you felt, but you don't think you would buy that and use it as your primary device for the next year.
I don't, and I know it's talking about battery life is such a crappy thing to do because it's so subjective on what third-party apps you use mostly. So my battery life could be horrible. Quinn's could be absolutely amazing. It's the most subjective of all subjective categories. But I evidently use third-party apps that like drill things more than most. So I don't think I could not use that as a daily phone.
Quinn, I know you've seen these. What are you thinking about this?
I'll tell you one thing. Twitter is excellent when it comes to battery life. No, so here's the thing. I was looking up some numbers while John was talking because he said 5.5 millimeters, which is the rumored thickness. And I was thinking, that's really thin, but is that much thinner than like the iPhone 6? Because if you hold the iPhone 6,
it's close.
It feels nuts. Like, especially coming from a big phone. Now you go back and hold the iPhone 6 and we're like, is it any wonder this thing bent? They were crazy for doing this. Well, listen to this. The iPhone 6 was 6.9 millimeters. So that's almost 1.5 millimeters thicker. The distance, the size difference between the iPhone 6 and the iPhone 16 Pro is 8.25 millimeters. And so the new iPhone is slated to be a greater distance in thinness from the iPhone 6, which is the thinnest iPhone ever made, from the current iPhone 16 Pro. So when you hold the 16 Pro and the 6 in your hands, you're like, this is bananas. Why did we have phones this thin? So that sounds crazy to have a phone that thin. I am less concerned about the battery. Where I'm concerned, and I wish I weren't, because this phone sounds amazing to me. I've always liked the quirky phones. I've liked the Mini. I use the regular Pro. I'm not a Pro Max guy. I did it last year because that was the 15 Pro Max was the one that had the camera system with the 5x telephoto. When that came down the line this year, I went back to the Pro and I've been super happy. I don't want to have to use the Max. I'm not a big phone guy, but I do like all the bells and whistles. And I'm very worried about the prospect of not having the camera system that I've very much become accustomed to, especially with the newborn. I'm taking a lot of pictures, and to feel like I'm hampered by the camera system on a phone that is thinner for what purpose? Just to be cool? That's a bit of a tough sell, but I'm going to buy it.
This is like
just
total
know me.
This is the total dad progression for phones, right? Like you want like ultra wide and wide, and then you're like, oh, now I need zoom. I want to like capture the baby as they're far away, and you look at your phone. I need the biggest possible.
Mm-hmm.
Babies aren't really that far away though. Like babies, they're not like playing softball.
But sometimes you're across the room and you want to capture something quick, right? Take it out, shoot your shot there. So to Quinn's point, the iPhone 17 Air is expected to be 33% thinner than the 16 Pro. Just if like you want to look at your phone, which I think is probably close to the same thickness as the 15 Pro and the 14 before, if people can just look at their phones to see. That is like significant. We also got in the 17 Pro and 17 Pro Max dummies as well as the 17. The 17 looked identical to the 16, which I think in itself was a big change from the 15. So it makes sense that wouldn't be giant. But the new visor looks weird. It looks just terrible. Stretch glass. I don't know if in the final design it will look better. If the color palette will make it look better. It doesn't appear to add anything to the phone except for, hey, here's how you can tell I have the new one. It is a nice place to rest your finger, though, while you're holding it on the flip side. Spec-wise, though, it should be a huge improvement for the non-Max users. Looks like you're going to get all the improvements that the Max had, vapor chambers and the cameras. That was 40 megapixel cameras across the board, which I think should be really good for people who just don't want the big version, but still want the best phone.
There's also a rumored new 24 megapixel front camera, which it's been 12 megapixels for, I don't know. It went from 7 to 12 a few years ago and it's just stayed there. Yeah. So that'd be nice. 12 gigs of RAM across the board, it sounds like. Yep. Finally Wi-Fi putting enough in there to do the Apple Intelligence things that they seem to want to do, hopefully.
Wi-Fi 7, 8K recording allegedly in there as well. What I'm super excited about is all the Apple Intelligence features that they're going to announce and show on stage and show us a commercial and show us the commercials for and have the celebrities endorse and then, obviously have to. I bet they almost don't mention Apple Intelligence on stage. They don't want anything that they cannot do anymore.
I was so... what's the word? I felt very positive about what Apple was going to do with Apple Intelligence after they announced it last year, specifically because they named it Apple Intelligence. In my mind, it felt like if they're naming it with the company name and putting the stamp of their name on this, then they must be incredibly confident about what they're going to be able to do. So I was so excited about because we had Galaxy AI from Samsung, which was really just them kind of mixing a little bit of their own stuff with Google. And then obviously Google and what they're doing, which is very impressive. But I use an iPhone on a daily basis. So I was excited to not rely on third-party apps and just have AI built in. And it's been like the biggest broken promise. People always on Twitter or social media, they'll point back to AirPower as another, but that doesn't feel like a broken promise to me. AirPower, it's a charger. It's not like I can't charge my phone in so many other ways. It was a cool idea, but I feel like MagSafe is a way better than that anyway. I can't think of a bigger broken promise that Apple has made and has made themselves look so bad in the process than this. And I don't know, how do you get a second chance here? What do we need to see at WWDC to make you feel like they've righted the course?
Them buying OpenAI would probably be the start. No.
That's does Apple even have the money to do that?
Yeah, they do. They do. It's a tricky one, this, isn't it?
I think that I don't think it's an Apple Maps level fiasco, but I think the trust in the Apple Intelligence brand has been not irreparably damaged, but severely damaged. Like being able to make my own emoji or image playground, it's something that I've used 6 times and have forgotten about. I've turned off notification summaries because it was a disaster. I don't want my mailbox trying to pick what emails are best for me to read. If I ever want an answer to come back from Siri and it's boomeranging through ChatGPT, I can almost just open the ChatGPT app on my phone, ask the question, get it back faster. So unless I'm looking to set a timer or do something with my HomeKit set up in my house, there is no compelling reason to use Siri or Apple Intelligence as it stands right now.
Writing tools, you don't get help writing your emails a little bit, make them sound more professional.
I'd rather use ChatGPT, Gemini, anything else for that.
Yeah, I don't know. I think you're right. Like when you say it's not Apple Maps level, I don't know that I hear the term Apple Intelligence and have any positive thought. Like
none.
It's almost a negative thought or something you almost want to laugh at.
And like I know the argument that Apple's a victim of their own policies and their own security policies and sort of how they offload data. And we're talking about Gemini and Google being a search company, and I'm not going to quite broach how Facebook treats personal data or how Meta treats personal data. OpenAI's approach to, say, unethically scraping content to build its model. So I understand Apple was already starting with the hand behind its back, but they didn't have to announce these things. Like, they didn't have to come out and be like, here's all the things we're going to do, and then not doing it. They could have said, we're working on these things because security is such a priority to us. When we do it, we want it to be right and secure, and it's going to take more time. Be patient. We know you want it. You know you want it. Like, when we do it, it's going to be done properly. I think people would have been fine. Right? Like, I'd rather wait for Apple's. I'd rather wait to see what Apple's doing instead of this just disaster that they ended up launching.
Things that are out work as promised. They're just not great things, right? Like, you can make an emoji and it works, but who needs that, right? The writing tools work. If you're, I feel like John and I were blogging back in the day. Like, we're writers. We know what we're doing. So we don't need like writing help.
I don't know. Making emoji.
But I would assume if you need writing tools, I'm assuming it's probably a good tool if you need it. I just don't. So the things that are out there work as promised, but those aren't the things people were excited to try to use.
No, there are better options for everything they have. And make your own emoji is like of Slofi level utility in like a day-to-day like use. Like, I don't need like a turtle carrying a mushroom riding a frog like that often. Like, those use cases are like few and far between.
Sure.
Where it makes any difference.
That's why they made those promises, right? Because I think Andrew's right. The features as they exist today, I mean, they do what Apple said they were going to do. And while I don't really use them because I'm aware of better tools, I wouldn't be surprised if a large number of Apple users don't mind using the built-in writing tools because they don't know about ChatGPT, or they're not going to go up and boot some LLM that has personal context with their writing style in mind. They don't really care. So I can see them being useful to a pretty decent number of people. But I think one of the reasons why Apple came out of the gate with promise for personal context and all of this stuff that they've failed to deliver is because they needed to show everybody, hey, we're not just copying everything else, everything else that everybody else is doing, but worse and done locally on the phone. We need to do something impressive and cool. And personal context and the private cloud compute was that. But as we've recently found out from some pretty credible reporting, not only did they not have the product functioning as designed, they hadn't even had a working demo. So they're up on stage saying, yeah, this stuff is coming later, this year and into next year. And Siri engineers that are supposed to be making this happen are like, we've never seen a working demo of this before. So it's all been whipped up by some mythical, kind of organization inside the company. You've got the UX team designing the way it'll look. You've got, legal and marketing looking at how to kind of properly kind of market and advertise it. And the engineers that are supposed to be building it are sitting in their chairs going, we've never seen this working. We can't get it working. And that's where I think you have the biggest hit to Apple's credibility is you've got stalwart Apple, I don't want to say loyalists, but the people that have been reporting on Apple for decades. You got John Gruber, who is not always super forgiving of Apple's trespasses, but gives Apple the benefit of the doubt and has been around Apple long enough that he has a general feeling of when Apple's being genuine about stuff and when they're kind of BSing a little bit. And he was even completely blindsided by this and saying, I don't know if I can ever trust anything they ever say again, that they're not showing me on stage or in my hands. If I can't touch it, if I can't use it, why do I have any reason to believe that it'll come? And that is just decades of good reputation evaporated overnight. Yeah. It is so catastrophically bad for Apple from a PR standpoint, and will be for years to come, that it's going to be bad. And that's assuming they can even rebound. I'm not even confident that they're going to be able to deliver on the stuff that they said they were working on now. I mean, they're now saying, oh yeah, it's a little delayed, but it's still coming. But is it? Right. Or is this an AirPower situation where inside of Apple, they're still like, yeah, no, this sucks, and we can't even really reliably get it running on a device. I mean, you look at the freaking meme, what are they called? The memoji? No.
Yeah. Memoji, Animoji.
And no, what's the one that you made?
Like the Memoji.
Genmoji. The Genmoji are still so bad on iOS 18.4 that your phone gets a bajillion degrees and it doesn't even follow most of the prompts. And you say, oh, use this person, but then after you put 2 other words, it removes that. I mean, the features they've shipped now are disappointing. And those are the easy ones. It's like Tesla with a full self-driving car. Like, it's easy to get the car to stay in the lanes, and they can't even do that right. And they're basically on stage saying, oh, yeah, no, this is going to drive itself in a year. It's fine.
We had Gruber on a couple weeks ago, and he said the same thing. He said what you said. He said heads need to roll. I think Apple's going to have to be at a crossroads for their company values at this point. Solving AI is not just a problem you can just throw money at and get a solution. It takes time. It takes data to learn to get these large language models to be usable, or at least up to par to what the competition is. And Apple's operating with a hand behind their back because of their privacy. They're going to have to either change their stance on how they're getting data and what they're doing, maybe opt in or opt out. But if they're going to have a chance to catch up, their privacy-focused approach is not going to work to get there. I'm not advocating one way or another, but if they want the data, they're competing against Google. And they're competing against OpenAI, who have access to that data that Apple just doesn't.
Yeah. No, I'm not a developer by any stretch of the imagination. So I'm just thinking out loud here. But the whole Siri personal context very obviously needs your data, right? So it's not like Apple's saying we're going to do this without your data. Your data is the whole reason for this feature to exist in the first place, right?
Yeah.
So it seems like that excuse doesn't work, because they are going to be using your data in order to do that. It almost seems like they were just very, they had a lot of hubris about what their abilities would be. I know back in the day, Steve Jobs would famously say like, hey, we need this feature by this time. And they were like, that's impossible. We can't do that. Well, make it happen. We need it. And then somehow they would do it, right? But working with LLMs, again, I'm no developer, but from what I've read and heard from people who are, is like, it isn't like coding an app or a website or anything else. It's not like, oh, there's a bug, let me fix the bug. Okay, now it works. Yeah. It's like the LLM is going to do what it's going to do, and you're almost like trying to wrangle it and see how much wrangling needs to be done. And like, you're almost like praying for it to, something that you tell it to do will finally click. You can't just code it and then stack an LLM on top and now everything's fine. So it's almost like Apple didn't realize that. Like, they thought, oh, we're going to get this done. We're going to code it, because usually a feature might take us this long to make. So we're going to make it and spend this much time, and then we'll have the feature done, and boom. But the LLM's not cooperating. And what do you do now? You just have to kind of figure it out.
And in theory, it's not even that difficult, theoretically, of a thing to do, because you look at other modern LLMs, you look at ChatGPT, you look at Google Gemini, you can feed it just a ton, an immense amount of data, and it's pretty good at contextual identification and awareness. So you can just give it a whole zip file full of crap and then be like, what was that thing in the one thing that was this? And it's like, this? And you think to yourself, well, yeah, holy crap, that's the thing I was thinking of. That's what personal context is promising. Just rather than you giving them a bunch of resources, Apple has to be able to kind of scrape the system for your personal information. But because they own the OS, in theory, they already have access to that. Spotlight has already indexed so much of this. If they have awareness of every file that's on your file system and every message that you've sent and received and your calendar invites, because they have access of calendar, in theory, if there's a way for them to just upload your entire life to your private LLM, it shouldn't be that difficult to identify context. I think the issue is that You can't reasonably do that, right? So you've got to build a local model on device that's smart enough to go, okay, they're asking about a date, and dates typically happen in calendars. I'm going to go into the calendar and see if there's any things that match this string or synonyms of this word or and that's where I think it gets vastly more complex and complicated. Is even the best LLMs that are running on massive compute are doing a decent job, but they're not perfect. And Apple's promising something that's doing effectively a perfect job on what's ultimately running on a local model on your phone that keeps battery life and memory management and all of this stuff in mind. And I think they probably just bit off more than they can chew. They thought, oh yeah, we can get this done. And you've got teams that are not able to pull it together. And it looks like, based on kind of recent reporting, you've got multiple teams that are kind of stepping on each other. You've got the AI/ML team, they're doing their own thing. The Siri team is underneath them that's just allegedly in complete disarray. And then Craig Federighi is apparently so fed up with how slow they're being that he just spun up his own intelligence systems division and started hiring hundreds of AI engineers. And the fact that that can happen in parallel just is bananas to me. Like it seems like such disorganization from a kind of organizational standpoint and from a reporting hierarchy that this is a difficult technical problem as is when we're all on the same page. And it doesn't even look like they're all on the same page. So, they're starting to make changes. Tim Cook has allegedly taken JG out of control of Siri and some of the AI/ML stuff, but that was a few weeks ago. And like WWDC's in 2 months. Like they're not going to figure this out in 2 months. I don't think.
Sir. It's the last day of April.
Yeah, in 1 month. I don't think they're going to figure this out in the next month. Like, so what do? You come into to WWDC and say, yeah, those things we promised you last year. Ah, darn. They're taking some time, but boy, we're working on it. Or do you finally show a live demo and say, like, this isn't smoke, like it actually exists? Or what are they going to have? I don't know. And will we even be all that impressed? Because it's been a year and a half of broken promises and what they've shipped has been fairly underwhelming. So what reason do we have to believe that this will suddenly be magical? I don't know.
I don't know. When they ask you to turn off all your Wi-Fi devices before they start a demo, you're not looking at like.
Do you want to see the demo? All right.
Turn off your Wi-Fi. I got a question for you, Quinn. And this is maybe you can't answer it. I've been getting really into like alternate history stuff and alternate like tech history. We had a video go up yesterday. Is what if Apple never made the iPhone? They didn't put the resources in to make the iPhone. They were just kind of coming out of a really bad decade. They focus on the iPod Touch. What do you? Because that was working time, right? They were selling 100 million iPods at the time.
True,
it was
true,
like
yeah.
They did not have to go into the phone. They didn't have to deal with carriers, FCC. The carriers had a stranglehold over all devices at the time. What do you think the mobile phone world would look like now? That's a
hard question, because I think on the one hand, obviously good ideas they come into fruition depending on whoever is around at the time. So I think that in the example of the iPod Touch, I mean, the iPod Touch was in many ways a derivative of the iPhone. It just didn't have a cellular modem in it. So I don't find it likely that the Touch would have existed in a world where the iPhone didn't. But at the same time, if you look at what was happening around the same era, other smartphone makers were figuring it out. Did it have the polish of the iPhone? Were they full screen touch devices? No. And would the smartphone look different today than it would have if not for the iPhone? I think probably. But ultimately, at the end of the day, do I think that they'd be that materially different? Probably not, because a lot of people were already kind of on similar paths to making something sufficiently good. It wouldn't have been the iPhone, but I think, we would have been further down the line. We wouldn't still be using flip phones. I'll put it that way. I don't think.
Well, what's interesting is, remember, Eric Schmidt was on the board of Apple, and when Google bought Android was going to be a BlackBerry competitor with a hardware keyboard.
I'm gonna get to that one. I'm gonna get to that one. But to Quinn's point, Apple was developing a tablet before the iPhone, so they had already put in R&D for touch and multi-touch before the phone came. So I think we would have gotten some version of a touchscreen iPod. Who knows if it would have been the iPod Touch. But just to piggyback off what Andrew was saying real fast, we filmed a video yesterday, and this one was one of the most fun I've had writing a script. Back in 2005, Droid Inc. was its own company, right? And they were looking for buyers, actively and publicly looking for buyers.
Right.
What would have happened if Apple bought them? 2 years before the iPhone, if Apple buys Android, what happens? I saw two paths, but if you want a minute to think, I can explain what mine were. It's a crazy world, and it's the darkest timeline for consumers all over. It doesn't work out well for anybody. That's not an Apple shareholder.
I don't know. What do you posit would have happened?
So I played it out two ways. So it was 2005. Apple uses it as the basis for iPhone OS. It's an open source Linux, and we get a version of the iPhone that we probably already have, except now there's no competition, right? There's nothing pushing and pulling the iPhone to be better. What happens to Samsung? Do they keep pushing Bada? Does Tizen become a thing? What we end up ultimately with is a ecosystem that is significantly more closed. Apple's not pushed to really open anything up at all. And I explored that a lot more. The other fork was Steve Jobs famously said Android is a stolen product. What if he buys it just to kill it? Shoves it in a drawer. Like, I don't know, it's probably a horrible analogy, but like the Hitler baby thing, right? Like you just take care of it before it becomes a problem. And we never sees the light of day. Is interesting. And that one was because what does Microsoft do? What happens with BlackBerry? Like to play that out so many different ways. I just thought it was such a cool like thought exercise. And if you had any like opinions on that.
That is interesting though. But I mean, when you say what does Microsoft do? Microsoft did come out with their consumer level. What did it start at? Windows Mobile 7 series.
Windows Mobile
Phone.
Existed.
Yeah,
the Moto
Windows Phone
Q
7 series
was an incumbent. It was there before the iPhone. It was popular.
Right.
And then Windows Phone 7 was very much we can make an iPhone. But it came out in, 2009? So it was already after Android had been a thing, and the market had already decided the two winners, basically.
If Android didn't exist, I wonder if Windows Mobile would have had the same fate.
Gotta assume Windows Mobile would have still existed, right? The Moto Q was like a big phone when the iPhone launched. That was the phone that Steve Ballmer was like laughing at, when he was making fun of the iPhone. So like Microsoft was still a major player, but would they ever have done something similar to Android? Or pushed Apple?
I don't know. And
It's weird because Windows
been able
is
to...
like, it's not open source, but Windows is like Apple makes Mac OS for Macs and Microsoft makes Windows for everything else that's not a Mac, right? Which is kind of Android's approach, which is Apple makes iOS for the iPhone and there's Android for anything else. I think I would love to get Steve Ballmer in a room and give him some truth serum and just be like,
tell us.
This was your thing to lose and you lost it. Like, how did that happen?
Big time. Let's ask him about what happened with Skype too. But to play, I think the last like part of that is Samsung. Like for almost all the world, Samsung is Android. Right? There's other companies, Google as the Pixel, but Samsung is Android. If Samsung doesn't have Android, when Apple buys it, whether they use it for iPhone OS and then iOS, or they kill it, like what does Samsung do? What does that mean for the phone market under $400 in developing countries? Like, where does that leave things?
Tizen, baby. No, just kidding.
With no iPhone ever existing?
Yeah, I mean, they had Bada at the time. Right? And like Symbian was a thing. Like what?
Symbian, yeah.
Yeah, like what happens?
Samsung paid $1 billion fee to basically be allowed to copy the iPhone.
It's the best money they ever
Apple
spent.
took, right? Like that. What a great deal, right? If Apple didn't make the iPhone, I mean, it's so weird to look in hindsight, but the iPhone really changed the world. Like it literally did. And a lot of other companies followed suit. Without that blueprint or whatever, it's hard to imagine what phones would look like today. I don't know that we would have these glass and metallic, super thin sheets that we can talk to anybody on Earth face to face. I can't even imagine.
I didn't want to pull a conversation, but I was writing these scripts like in a vacuum, and like I love the alternate history stuff. I was just curious what the other opinions were, because obviously there's no wrong one.
All right,
That's a good question. I think we would. I'm not sure I'm on the same page as Andrew. I think you'd look and be like, oh yeah, that's a phone. That's a smartphone. And you might, load up the UI and be like, oh, that's a stupidly designed, or like slide out keyboard, huh? But I don't think that we'd be looking at them going like, what is this newfangled device? I think eventually we would have ended up somewhere near the same idea, just because other companies were kind of working on similar-ish adjacent stuff prior to the iPhone. And the Google Sooner, the Android phone with the keyboard, if you believe the people that were working on the project, which has been corroborated enough that I think there's some bit of credibility there, by mid to late 2006, they're already kind of deciding, this isn't really a viable thing. Before the iPhone is even announced, so I think it's December of 2006, or Google releases a simulator that you can run on your desktop that's fairly similar to what would become the appearance of the T-Mobile G1. And if you look at that, it's rough compared to the first iPhone. Yeah. But that was before the iPhone was even announced, and we were already kind of getting there. Now, would have it come with a keyboard? Probably. Would have it come with a bunch of hardware buttons? Yeah. But you look at the home screen and you go, yeah, that's a smartphone looking home screen. And so I think we probably would have come to something eventually.
All right. So
or we'd all be using iPod Classics, and you'd have to scroll in order to dial your,
So now that I hijacked the conversation, Quinn, you alluded to self-driving a little while ago.
Yes, you did.
You've been doing some self-driving of your own in a unique way in your
changing history.
Yeah.
In a way. Changing history.
I've been watching those videos and be like, man, I got to order this. Can you just tell us what's going on there?
What's going on? Comma 3X.
Yeah. So it is a Snapdragon 845 sporting device, which is a 7-year-old SoC. So it doesn't have impressive compute. It's got a 5 or 6 inch OLED touchscreen, and then it's got 3 cameras. 2 face the road and 1 faces you for driver monitoring. And in theory, it can see your kind of blind spots as well.
This is all in the same one device, not multiple different pieces.
One. It looks like a dash cam. It's basically a smartphone that you stick onto your windshield inside your cabin, and then you plug it into your vehicle. It's a USB-C powered device, and so you have to supply it power, and you have to connect it to your car over CAN, which is the communication network that most cars use. Not all of them, but most cars use. And
you just plug in the module? Just plug it in.
Yeah. So it depends on what vehicle you have. Some are super slick. Like if you have a Toyota vehicle, you just pop the kind of shield that's behind your rear view mirror. You just pop that down. There's a little piggy tail harness you plug in, and then you plug the cable into the Comma 3X, and you're done. It takes 2 minutes to install it. The Rivian that I've installed it in is a little bit more complicated of an install, because you've got to basically access and hijack the autonomy computer that's underneath the passenger footwell. So I kind of had to route the cable along my, my headliner and my pillar, but 20, 30 minutes, you'd never know. There's a little USB-C cable hanging out behind my rearview mirror that goes down to the screen that's on my dashboard. And what it's effectively doing is hijacking and injecting commands that your vehicle is trying to send to the steering and longitudinal control stack. And so, you've got your self-driving computer, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you've got some capable vehicle. Basically, any car that's got any type of lane keeping, this can work with. So Hyundai Kia works great with the HDA2 systems, works great with Subaru because Subaru has eyesight. It works with most of the Mobileye equipped vehicles, which is most of what remains on the market. So pretty much any car, you're basically sticking something in between the computer that's built into your car from the factory and the steering wheel and accelerator. And the computer is sending commands into the Comma 3X, and it goes, cool. Yeah, no, we're not doing that. And then it injects its own signals to the vehicle to actually steer and to apply acceleration and or braking and whatever. And so it hijacks, it's quite literally hacking your vehicle to do what it wants to do instead. Where it's a unique system and where I think it's really cool is that, like Tesla and like the second generation Rivian, it is running a local inference model. So it is trained on a bunch of data from a big supercomputer. It's distilled down to a localized model that can run on a Snapdragon 845. And so it's not that dissimilar from the Dojo computer that Tesla is using to train their hardware 3 and hardware 4 compute modules, which are very, at the end of the day, I mean, they're far more powerful than this little smartphone you're going to your dashboard. But computers that use a couple hundred watts under load, I mean, they're really efficient machines. But it's training these models, and on device, you've just got a driving model that's trained off of millions of miles of highway driving from humans, and then it runs a bunch of stuff in simulation. Comma, which is the company that develops this product, and OpenPilot, which is the open source software that that the little piece of hardware runs. They have second only to Tesla in the number of miles logged in simulation. They've got more than Waymo. They've got more than Cruise. They've got more than pretty much anybody else. Hundreds of millions of miles, all logged in a simulator. When there's an accident or when it goes outside of the lines or when it does something stupid, it tags it and goes, nope, we got to figure this out. And then it creates an AI ML inference model that they're able to distill down into a couple of gigabytes that runs in memory on a really old smartphone. And the end result is you can stick this on your dashboard. In my Rivian, I can get on the freeway. I push my drive stop down once, and it is, and we tested it, I just published a video on it, it is better than any other on-highway lane keeping system that I've ever used, second only to Tesla FSD. So I think Tesla FSD is still king, but after that, I think it's this stupid little smartphone you glue to your dashboard. It's $1,000, you plug it in your car. And
what your Rivian has built in.
Way better. I've got a first-gen Rivian that kind of sucks. The second-gen Rivian, and I'm not sure Rivian will be happy with this video, Rivian just let me loan a second-generation Rivian, and they're promoting their hands-off driving assistant kind of function. And it works well. And you can get on the freeway, and you push the drive stalk down, and then when you're in certain mapped roads, it goes, okay, you can take your hands off the steering wheel, and you can just sit there, and the Rivian system will mostly do it. But the Comma system is more confident, it merges better, it controls acceleration and braking better, it's better when people cut you off, it's better when people veer into your lane. It drives more like a human than Rivian's system does. And it's running on a really old smartphone that you stick to your windshield. It's wild.
What does it make you do for like driver attention type things?
Yeah, so there is, by default, it's built in, can be disabled. There is a camera, an IR-capable camera on the front of the device that, same as Rivian and Tesla's more advanced systems, it's looking for driver attention. So it's looking at your pupils, and it's even context aware. And so it's not like you can fool it by like holding your phone way out in front of you. Like it's able to notice, like if you've got your arm positioned firmly or if you've got a phone in your hand, you're not paying attention. And so if you take your eyes off the road for more than a couple seconds, it starts beeping like crazy at you going, hey, you got to pay attention. And if you keep ignoring the system, it'll just start decelerating and braking the vehicle like most of these systems do.
And how would you compare it to FSD and autopilot?
Yeah,
I mean,
it's better than autopilot, full stop. Not even close. Compared to FSD, I think FSD, because it's got such an incredible inference model and because the FSD highway stack is so good, I think that FSD is still more capable. But one example I'll give you that only FSD and OpenPilot running on the Comma 3X could achieve was outside on I-15 out here. There's a section of road that's really kind of bizarre. It's like a little S curve, but it's not that aggressive of an S curve. Like if you look at the barriers, it's not turning that much, but the lane lines are pretty aggressive. Like it's a pretty steep S curve, but it's really short. We're talking within like maybe a eighth of a mile at the most. Nobody drives through that S perfectly because it's stupid. If you just keep driving straight, then you'll just end up on the other side. And so I've had a lot of instances where I'm driving in my Rivian or my wife's Kia, which has a really great lane keeping system, and it keeps within those lanes almost exactly. But it's such a tight S-curve in such a short distance that you're kind of like, whoa, this isn't that comfortable. It's kind of that floaty, drunk feeling, computerized driving feel. And I've actually had to disengage the system on my Rivian a number of times because other drivers next to me, they're not going through that S-curve. And so they get pretty close to my car because they're encroaching on my lane. That's something the humans do. Should we do that? Probably not, but we do. And this comma system, along with FSD, drives just like a person. So it stays within the lines, but it gets really close to each side of the S-curve because it's like, what's the point in making it jerky on the inside? If I can see an eighth of a mile ahead, that it goes back to being straight. And so it drives like a person through this section. And if there's other people that encroach in your lane and the camera can see it, well, it just moves over a little bit. And other systems don't have the tendency to do this. They're dead focused on there are lines in front of me to left and right, and I must stay within those at all times. And this system doesn't. It just drives like a person. Which is really cool.
That's insane. And to anybody following the FSD stuff with hardware 4 not being retrofitting to hardware 3, not being working with hardware 5, the Snapdragon 845 chip that Quinn is talking about, just for those that follow tech, that was last used in the Galaxy S9 phone. The Nokia PureView, they don't even make phones anymore. The Razer Phone 2 use that. The Pixel 3. So we are going we are going way back in phones. Even LG, the LG G7 ThinQ, they're not even in the smartphone space anymore. Is unbelievably incredible.
Now, where this system begins to fall apart is it can only see forward. In theory, it has a 360-degree view because it's got the cameras all over, but there is no training model to accommodate for that. And so on my Rivian, it will drive straight indefinitely. It doesn't need lane lines, just like FSD, which my Kia does a really great job if it sees lane lines. Once one side of the lane disappears, it's like, whoa, what's going on? This doesn't. You can drive in a neighborhood street and it'll steer the wheel just fine. It stays to the side of the road. If there's traffic, it moves over. If there's oncoming traffic towards you and it's in the middle of the road, it kind of goes to the shoulder. It drives like a person. However, it can only do so viewing information from kind of ahead of you. And so the way that it does certain functions is dependent on what the vehicle can feed it. So the kind of gold standard of comma AI vehicles are Toyota cars. Toyotas have a bunch of information through CAN. They're so ubiquitous that that's where comma has spent the most amount of time making sure that everything works. So in a Camry, you can make a lane change or attempt to make a lane change. And right now it doesn't do it automatically. It used to, and then they actually dialed stuff back so Comma AI is run by George Hotz, who's the kind of famous GeoHot, like PlayStation 3 jailbreaker from way back in the day. He left the company and then he came back and said, everything you guys are doing sucks. And they had been trying to work on an end-to-end kind of FSD style solution. There's a video a couple of years ago of them like driving to Taco Bell and it's really bad. It's like early FSD, but much worse. He comes back and goes, this sucks. If your models aren't good, what's the point in trying to do anything more aggressive? And so they've kind of in the last 6 months to a year gone back to basics. They're building the models from the ground up. And once they have good models, then they'll start to apply the kind of feature set elsewhere again. But if you're in a Camry and you make a right-hand turn, or you try to change lanes, it can't see that. The models aren't trained to do that. So what it will do is it'll look through the CAN to see if the CAN detects anything in the blind spot. If there's something in the blind spot, there is a CAN bus message that says like, it's binary. It goes yes or no, but yes, there's somebody in the blind spot. And it does that probably through the parking ultrasonics. Sometimes it's a corner radar, but the device is saying, the car is saying, yes, person is here or no person is not here. And then the comma goes, okay, the car says there's nobody there. Let's make the lane change. Or it says somebody's there. Let's wait until that is cleared until we attempt the lane change. But that's highly dependent on the vehicle that you've got. And that's kind of what's weird about comma right now and about OpenPilot is every vehicle is in a different state of being ported. Some vehicles can only control steering. Some vehicles can control steering and acceleration and braking. Some vehicles, like my Rivian, they can't detect what's in the blind spot. And so if I try to make a lane change while somebody's in my blind spot, I will crash into them. So it doesn't remove all of that awareness, because right now it's still early days. They're training these models, and the models will be trained probably into the future. But for right now, there's little workarounds to detect whether or not it can do certain functions well. And checking blind spots is one of them. Another example is acceleration and speed. So by default, at least on the Rivian right now, if you're using OpenPilot on your Rivian, it's defaulting to the Rivian's traffic-aware cruise control. So OpenPilot is controlling steering, but it's not controlling gas and brakes. That's still controlled by the radar cruise control on the car. If you've ever used Rivian's radar cruise control, not on the highway, you know it sucks.
Yeah.
It's really optimized for the highway. And on the freeway, it's okay. But as soon as you pull off the freeway, it's terrible. So I'm running a branch. Again, this is the beauty of open source software. I'm running an upstream branch of OpenPilot called SunnyPilot. And SunnyPilot adds little buttons onto the screen. And so on the touch screen of this little computer, I can control my speed by going up and down. And that's how I do it right now. And because the only reason it can't control the Rivian is, at the moment, the people that are porting OpenPilot to support Rivians have not been able to figure out where Rivian is hiding on the CAN bus the button controls for the steering wheel. And so because the buttons on the steering wheel don't do anything when you're on OpenPilot, they're like, well, we can't control the speed because there's no way for you to tell the device what speed you want to go. But SunnyPilot is like, well, we don't need you to use the steering wheel buttons. We'll just put buttons on the screen, and they're kind of inconvenient, but you can reach up and touch the buttons and it'll drive completely vision-based, not using radar, not using ultrasonics, nothing. It's just pure vision-based, just like Tesla's stack is. And it's shockingly good. And hopefully, in the next few weeks or months, they'll figure out how to pull the button messages off of CAN such that I can run it without having to reach up and touch the screen. But yeah.
What's to prevent other manufacturers from wanting to use? Is it like the CarPlay situation where they want to own the stack?
That's my suspicion. I think part of it is potentially a liability thing, but I think that Comma is in a pretty good place right now. Well, okay. They're a weird company. The more that I talk to people at Comma, and I'm saying this in the nicest way that I can, the more that I'm like, you guys are just nerdy engineers. They don't know how to run a business. They are not really focused on running a business. If you go to their website, they don't even really care about full self-driving. Their goal is generalized autonomy. So they're focused on building a robot like Tesla is with the Tesla Optimus. And full self-driving, this, OpenPilot thing you glue to your dashboard, this is just a means to the end. It gives them enough money to keep doing the quirky stuff that they want to do to build their humanoid robot, right? And I'm sitting here thinking, you guys, like, you've got the best lane keeping software on the market. You basically started it from scratch 8 months ago, and it's already where it is. And I would think that if you did proper validation and you implemented it into vehicles, that there would be automakers lined up out the door to put this version of their software into their vehicles. You rebrand it something else. You could go fully hands off. Because I've driven hundreds of miles on the highway without touching the steering wheel even one time.
That's crazy.
It's bulletproof. It is so good. But they just don't really have any interest in that because they want to be a robotics company. And so, okay, I guess. But because it's open source, as long as they contribute to the kind of open source code base, there's no reason that Rivian couldn't go, okay, you know what? Our stack sucks. We're going to replace it with OpenPilot, and we're running OpenPilot in the car. Now, Rivian stack, I actually think is pretty good. And I think what they've shown really recently is quite promising, and that in the next few years, I think they'll get closer to FSD than OpenPilot will. But I don't know. Every time OpenPilot says something crazy, it's almost like that early Elon stuff where he'd say something and you're like, that's nuts. That's never happening. And then it wouldn't quite happen, but it got close enough that you're like, okay, maybe we should believe this guy on a couple things. That's what I think is happening with OpenPilot. George Hotz said on Twitter in January of this year, he goes, wow, I just drove Tesla FSD 13. It's amazing. And, our models that we're building, we're super confident that we'll be at about the same place that FSD is with hardware that we have now, plus a little bit of extra processing horsepower, but not much within the next 2 years. And you're like, okay, come on. Like, it's glued to your dashboard. You're using cameras that are, inside of they're not built into the windshield. They're not highly calibrated. You're just sticking a phone basically on a windshield and saying, go. And so you hear something like that and you go, that's not going to happen. But then again, there is no reason that this 8-year-old smartphone glued to a dashboard should drive a car better than basically everything else on the road. And yet it does. So I have a tendency to believe the nutty stuff they say.
I'm like, I keep staring at it like in the car. Like I want this thing so badly. I haven't pulled the trigger.
I have one question. As you were talking, what kept running through my brain was, Teslas have 8 cameras roughly in at least the new ones. Is it like 12?
They have 11 cameras, 4 corner radars, a forward radar. Okay. They've got all sorts of crap.
So when you're telling me that this thing that you basically just looks through your windshield performs so much better than what Rivian has with all these cameras and radars, and that they're trying to hit, FSD capability, which is, again, there's cameras all over the place. Something's missing in my brain. That is, what are we doing with all this other hardware that isn't necessary for what they're doing?
And that's where I land with you. On the one side, it is only further proof and validation of what Elon Musk has been saying for several years, where he basically says, hey, the more stuff you have in the car, the more hardware, the more you're going to have to determine what's telling the truth when there's a conflict in information, right? So if I've got a LiDAR system or if I've got radar, if I've got radar that says, holy crap, there's something in front of you right now, you're going to crash into it. And the cameras are going, no, there's not. There's a bridge in half a mile that the radar bounced off of. Then you have a pretty good idea. You have the ability, this idea of sensor fusion, where if you have multiple sensors, then you can kind of corroborate the data between different sensors. But Tesla has been saying for years, actually, that's not helpful because then you're feeding a bunch of potential misinformation into the model and it can't really determine what is or isn't accurate. And everybody said, yeah, theoretically, that's great in concept, but practically at the end of the day, cameras are not good enough to be able to see everything that's going on the road. You're never going to get a vehicle full self-driving with just cameras. It's not going to happen. And FSD isn't fully driving itself, but it's pretty freaking good, and it's using just cameras. And so I think that is a further emphasis. This Comma AI device, it's not using radar. It's not using anything else. There's just 2 cameras that face the road, and it's controlling speed and lane keeping and everything else better than just about anything. It works in the dark. It works at sunset. It works. I haven't had any issues where it goes, hey, I can't see. You need to take over. Even more so than Tesla, which is pretty remarkable. And or terrifying, depending on how confident you believe the system to be. But on the other hand, I also see the point and the rationale saying, well, this thing has got 3 cameras. Surely there's no way that it's ever going to be fully capable of driving itself. And I tend to agree with that sentiment. They've got an alpha version of full longitudinal control. They call it experimental mode, where it's supposed to stop at stop signs and stop at stoplights and to be able to make turns. And it sucks. It's really bad. So this thing is really, really, really good on the freeway. And that's about it. Now, you can use it on city streets and it works, but it's not an amazing experience. It's like autopilot was a few years ago on the streets. It's functional, but I wouldn't trust it with my life. I'm going to be paying attention. But on the freeway, it's so good that I can kind of check out a little bit and be pretty confident that things are going to be okay. Now, Comma's saying, we don't need that much more. We don't need sensor fusion. We don't need a bunch of other crap to be able to self-drive. If the models are good, they'll drive themselves, which is the same thing Tesla's been saying for years. But you're right. Tesla's been saying that with a fairly powerful computer and 11 cameras. And this is running a 7-year-old smartphone processor and 3 cameras. So can Comma achieve that eventually? I think it's possible, but not with this hardware. You're going to need something else.
How would it handle Mark Rober's Looney Tunes test?
That's a good question. Honestly, it would probably fail in the same way that the Tesla would have failed. Now, there's a bunch of hoopla about whether or not Mark's test was genuine and whether or not FSD would actually be fooled by it. But it, for good and bad, is just a camera sensor suite. And so it's possible that it would go, yeah, that's a road. The road's clear and open. It doesn't have a LiDAR sensor that's going, no, that's a brick wall. It doesn't have a radar where the radar's pinging back from it. And, and that's the benefit. That's where you hear, you look at Waymo, and Waymo has a far different kind of ideology about how they operate stuff. Is they're like, no, you need different sensors, because then in the mouth of two witnesses will I make myself known, right? Like if the radar and the LiDAR are both going, yeah, no, there's something there, and the cameras are like, nah, man, it's all good, then maybe we should depend on those, given and you still have models that say, okay, well, what context is it? Is it raining really heavily? Because if it is, LiDAR doesn't work in the rain. And so let's maybe ignore what the LiDAR is saying. But you know what? You kind of you give weighted averages on confidence levels based on the environment that you're in. And all of the systems that are truly right now fully self-autonomous, Waymo, Cruise, couple of others that exist, they're all using this more traditional hardware stack. And Tesla's really the first one that has said, no, we don't need all that crap. We're going to do it without it. And everybody agrees with them in theory, but only in theory. In practice, when you get rubber to the road, the reality is most people just don't think only cameras are good enough. And yet, we'll see. I mean, will we believe Elon Musk if this robotaxi thing ever comes out? And if it does come out and it drives really well? What I will tell you is that I tried the latest version of FSD on the FSD 12 branch. So this is hardware 3. New hardware 4 cars are allegedly even more capable. But I was probably at 99%, maybe even a little higher. I mean, it just is remarkable how good it is. Left turns, right turns, get in on freeways, exits. It's awesome. It's kind of dumb at contextual awareness. So if you're on the freeway and there's a ton of traffic, it's not smart enough to know, oh, it's rush hour. I should probably start making my way over to the exit a little bit sooner than I normally would, because it's going to be pretty tricky to sneak in between these lanes. It's just like, I'm doing good. And then it's like, oh no, I missed the exit. I've got to figure out how to get there next. So FSD still struggles there, but in terms of following the rules of the road, does it feel safe? It's super, super good. Way, way better than when I last tried it extensively a couple of years ago. And you talk to Elon Musk and he talks about how, okay, well, it's this march of nines. We need to get to 99.999. How many nines after 0.9 do you need to get until it's better than humans, to the point where it would be stupid to drive a car as a person, because we're just frankly worse at it. I don't know how many nines that would be, but right now, I don't even think Tesla FSD is at 99.9. It's probably close, but it's not there yet. And if you talk to Elon Musk, he says 99.9 is super easy. It's every 0.9 after that gets harder and harder and harder at an exponential rate. But having said that, they've gone from being like maybe 50% to 99.7 in 2 years, which is pretty astonishing. So I don't know. I hate to give Elon kudos, but it's pretty freaking cool. And it works pretty freaking well. Yeah. So anyway,
I made the analogy I needed to graduate from a 15-year-old who just got its learner's permit to a 16-year-old who's been driving for a year.
Yeah.
Like that.
What I actually said in my video was, at the end of driving with full self-driving, I said, this is like a 4-star Uber driver. It's better than a lot of Uber drivers I've had, except for this guy. This driver has mild fits of narcolepsy. So would I trust my hands to this vehicle, even though it's a 4-star most of the time? No, I'd probably still trust the 3-star Uber driver, because even though they might get in a fender bender or they might not pay attention, I'm probably not going to die. And there's been a couple times where FSD has done something where you're like, whoa, what are you thinking? Because even the worst human drivers are still humans. We can intuit with relative confidence what the best thing is to do. Vehicles are only as good as the information they receive. And sometimes Tesla FSD will receive information that's like, I'm going to do this. And you're like, what would have made you think to do? No human would ever do that. So, yeah.
Excellent. Quinn, thanks for joining us this week.
Thanks for
appreciate
having
it,
me.
man. Thank you.
I always enjoy coming on.
This is interesting, man. I started to put you guys on the spot with the alternate history stuff, but the commas was, I'm meaning to ask you about this, and saw the videos a few months ago, and it's cool to sort of hear like the first person experience of it.
Yeah. And I mean, it's in the same kind of vein because it's manually ported by the community to every car. All the cars operate on the same driving models, but it's a matter of basically community work to getting the features to work. And there's a lot of variables that play in this, like how much steering torque do we apply to the steering wheel? What's the rate of deceleration or acceleration given the payload and the mass of the vehicle? There's a bunch of mathematical crap that really smart people, far smarter than I, are dealing with. But what's cool is you look at the videos I was posting on Twitter 2 months ago when I got this device, and it worked, but I was also kind of like, this is pretty freaking scary. Like, it works, but I would not trust, to the point where now I'm not going to, but I would feel confident not looking at the road for several minutes uninterrupted on the freeway with full confidence everything would be fine.
Jeez.
How does your wife feel? Is she get in the car with you while this thing's turned on?
So that's actually a good
Got the car seat in there?
indicator. Yeah, we've got the car seat in there. She specifically said, I don't want this in my car. However, there have been times in the last couple of weeks when the Rivian port has gotten better, that we're on the freeway and I'm not driving and she has no idea. So if that's not an endorsement, I don't really know what is.
And that is it for this edition of Geared Up. Thank you so much for listening. Of course, you can catch John and I on YouTube. I'm at youtube.com/gearlive, and John is at youtube.com/John4Lakers. Feel free to head over and subscribe to our channels to stay up to date on all the latest tech. Speaking of subscribing, you can subscribe to Geared Up in your favorite podcast app if you haven't done so already. Just search Geared Up, that's 2 words, not one, in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pocket Casts, Overcast, or really wherever you choose to listen. If you like what we do, please consider leaving us a rating and review. It really helps other people find the show. Geared Up is a Gear Live podcast, and you can see more from us at gearlive.com. Thank you so much for listening. For John Rettinger, I'm Andru Edwards, and we'll catch you in the next episode.